The Carpenter and the Cradle, a History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Cook Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 39. The helicopter touched down, temporarily blinding the watchers by raising a cloud of dust and blowing the girls' hair around their faces. "Okay, hopefully we'll be back soon. Don't worry, everything will be fine," Paul Eagles said, kissing his wife and climbing aboard. Will followed suit, as Rex and his sisters and mother waved them off. There was an air of solemnity to the mission, but there was some excitement, no denying it. "Well, the rest of us Lions," Caroline Lyons said to her 3 remainers. "Should we head for Graham Brower's? Uncle Hal will want to hear all about your adventures. There's a few details I'm not too clear on myself." The Lions trundled back into their van, as did the Eagles. "Tell me again why Will isn't here?" Graham said for the 3rd time. The story had been told twice, but by too many voices all at once. "Just one of you this time. Rex, you try. Maybe I'll get it if you tell it." Rex summed up the adventure on Victoria's Peak by explaining that the group had found an injured man up the mountain, and Will had gone on the rescue mission in the helicopter to help relocate the area where the man was. He carefully avoided any mention of how the man had become injured in the first place. No need to add to Graham's worry list. Uncle Hal had caught wind that there was more to the tale, and he asked some searching questions about how they'd discovered the man in the first place. Rex and Coral shrugged and looked at each other awkwardly until Caroline changed the subject. Tall, broad-shouldered, and handsome, there was a strong resemblance between Hal Lyons and his brother's boys. He looked so much like his late brother, Rand Lyons. Rand's sons could have passed for his. The kids didn't see as much of him as they would have liked, not living in the same town, but Hal had tried to pick up the slack of helping father the kids as much as he could from a distance. It wasn't surprising to Coral that he was more than mildly interested in knowing all the details. Her stomach twisted and turned at the thought of having to admit out loud her role in the story. No matter how despicable Georgie's stepfather may be, and how endangered she had felt in the moment, there was no way she could be entirely comfortable with the fact that there was an injured man lying in the bottom of a ravine, and a helicopter rescue mission underway to retrieve him, all because of her. Mercifully, Rex and Caroline, who had picked up some of the details of the story but not all of them on the drive into Cherryton, kept the talk on the subject as short as possible, and then steered the conversation elsewhere. Graham's cooking was delicious, as usual. Not that Coral would have noticed. She forced the cardboard that Graham's cheesy scalloped potatoes had turned into in her mouth, down past the lump in her throat, and gulped water to help them on their way down. Even after the long hike on little food, any hunger she would have normally felt was erased. But she was aware how thirsty she was. Her dry mouth clamored for more and more water. As Fern and Georgie mounted the bike and Fern prepared to wobble on her way, standing up with Georgie on the seat behind her, a car pulled up alongside them. "Hey, girls," a dark-haired, ponytailed man called to them out the open window. From instinct, Fern turned to answer him. In a split second, she was aware that Georgie would not want to be seen. But it would have been rude not to answer the man, and Fern was well trained not to be rude, ever. "Yes?" Fern asked, facing the man. Her breath caught in her throat. Was it? It almost looked like. She hissed back at Georgie. "Georgie, is that—" Georgie took a quick look and answered her in an undertone. "My stepfather? No, he looks kind of like him, though." Fern's lungs started working again, and she smiled pleasantly at the man, eager for him not to notice her behavior as in any way out of the ordinary. "I'm a little lost," the man said, smiling back. "Just wondering if you can give me some directions. I have a map here, if you don't mind taking a look and seeing if you can spot where we are on it." He held the map out the window, and Fern pulled the bike up closer to the man to take a look. Before she had time to react, the man had the car door open and had Georgie firmly by one arm, dragging her off the bike seat. Fern and the bike toppled to the ground in a heap. "Fern, go!" Georgie shrieked wildly as the stranger pulled her, kicking and flailing, into his back seat. Fern sprang to her feet and clambered on the bike, pointing its front toward the back of the car. Against every instinct this time, which was screaming at her to obey Georgie and pedal away as fast as her overcooked spaghetti legs would take her, she glanced at the license plate just long enough to embed the combination of letters and numbers in her mind. She repeated it over and over to herself in a sort of chant, to the rhythm of her legs pumping around and around on the pedals. She was unaware of where she was going, but she had to get away. She had to get help. She had to find someone who would listen. She raced aimlessly down the street. Getting away from the man and the car with Georgie in it, that was her only thought. As fast as legs and lungs would take her, in the opposite direction. She had no other plan at the moment. All she knew was that she couldn't help Georgie if the man nabbed both of them. There, the bike path. No car could follow her there through the park. Gradually her plan of action began forming in her mind as she turned off the street and onto the packed dirt of the bike path. In the moonlight, Ko stumbled and almost fell on an unexpected route. But he caught himself. He had to hurry. He couldn't waste time moving cautiously and safely. He needed every advantage his head start would give him on the men who would surely be hunting him down as soon as his absence was noted in the morning. And it would take him the entire next day to complete the mission he'd set before himself. There were only a handful who had been trusted with the information of the location where he'd been instructed to hide the cradle from prying eyes and the enemy. But that handful would know where to come and find him. There was no sense trying to outsmart the dogs at this point. Even without the dogs, the trusted men would know where to come after him. His best strategy was to count on his speed to stay ahead of any followers. Once he reached the cradle's hiding place, that would be the time for caution and trying to throw his pursuers off his scent. He'd thought it all out. He knew the spot where he'd relocate the cradle. It should be safe there until he'd had a chance to turn it over to its rightful owner. He'd made up his mind that the one he'd always considered the enemy was, in fact, the rightful owner. And something in Ko determined that he wanted to return it to its rightful owner. But it was a fearful weight he'd taken on with his decision. He could never go back. Not to his own people, or Limo's people, he corrected himself. That would be a death sentence. For better or worse, he was casting in his lot with the others. And what if he was wrong? What if Hab and Yosa had lied to him? What if Zhao's people did prove to be his enemies after all? What if he was walking into a trap? His hands and feet grew tingly and cold as he stared the thought in the face. He mustn't do that. He mustn't think about it. He'd decided. He had to go on with it. Or must he? It wasn't too late to turn back. He'd be back before daylight if he turned around now, and no one would know anything about what he'd considered doing. The temptation hovered all around him, but as if possessed of their own mind and will, his feet kept on moving in their chosen course. Straight ahead.